Shavings, curling in spirals, fell to the floor around Michael Stone's weathered hands. His knife mercilessly cut into the maple, working with frightening precision. Outside the workshop window, in the morning mist of Millbrook, a black BMW loomed like a predator. A man in a $1 million suit clutched a manila envelope to his chest and trembled. Michael's steel-gray eyes met the stranger's desperate face through the glass. The chisel froze mid-stroke. Something clenched inside him. Recognition? Perhaps fear? The stranger's polished shoes slipped on the old, cracked wood as he stepped closer. "My daughter, she hasn't moved for 6 months." The man's voice broke through the door, raw with exhaustion and hopelessness. "The doctors say they can't do anything more. I've spent everything. All connections, all services, all last hope." Michael put down his knife and opened the door, seeing the emptiness of devastation in the father's eyes. "Let me help her," he said softly. For 2 years, Michael had been hiding in this small Connecticut town, carving furniture and children's toys, pretending that the measured rhythm of carpentry could drown out the ghosts of his nights. Millbrook was a place where secrets were safely kept beneath layers of provincial politeness and autumn leaves. Through the thin walls, he could hear his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, humming to herself as she got ready for school. Her voice was the only thing holding him to this new life, built on the ashes of the past. The morning air carried the scent of burning wood from neighboring fireplaces, mingling with the pungent aroma of wood glue, firmly embedded in the atmosphere of his workshop like a second skin. He chose this place because here, a person could simply disappear, could become someone entirely different. The stranger at his door seemed like a man hollowed out from within. Richard Wellington recognized him, even without ever having seen him in person. He was 6 feet tall, but looked smaller, diminished by long months of sleepless nights and medical consultations that had led nowhere. The expensive suit hung on him like a sack. He had probably lost a full 20 pounds since his daughter's tragedy. His hands trembled as he clutched the envelope to his chest, as if it contained his last prayer. The BMW's engine still crackled as it cooled, an incongruous luxury among the pickups and battered sedans that usually grace this working-class neighborhood. Michael saw it clearly in his face, that particular kind of despair when a person has unlimited resources, but they are utterly useless against the most important problem. "You've got the wrong door," Michael said, but his voice sounded unconvincing. He knew perfectly well who Richard Wellington was, the head of a major insurance company whose emblem adorned bills across New England. But more importantly, he remembered the accident that had made headlines 6 months ago, when a 16-year-old honor student's car was thrown against an oak tree by the roadside at night. The fact that Wellington was standing on his doorstep spoke for itself. Someone had talked. Someone knew about the life he had abandoned, about the skills he had left behind, along with his wife's medical bills and his shattered self-confidence. Richard's voice grew stronger, more insistent, cutting through Michael's false calm like a scalpel through living flesh. "I know who you used to be. Dr. Michael Stone, head of neurosurgery at Yale Hospital in New Haven. I know you worked miracles before you disappeared." Richard spoke quickly, as if he had rehearsed the speech 1,000 times during sleepless nights. "My daughter Sarah has been paralyzed below the waist since the accident. Every specialist in the country says there's nothing more to be done. But I've heard whispers in the medical community about your methods, about cases where you brought people back from the brink of the impossible." Michael's jaw tightened as memories flooded his brain like an icy wave. The operating room light, the skillful dance of scalpel and needle, the almost divine feeling of holding someone else's fate in your hands. And then, the nightmare. The steady beep of the monitors suddenly ceased, and his wife's face turned white on the very operating table where he had promised to save her. Richard stepped closer, and his desperation was palpable in the morning air. "I've tried everything. Experimental treatment in Switzerland, stem cells in Germany, acupuncture, meditative practices of healers. I've spent over $3 million chasing hope, and nothing has helped. But Sarah isn't just physically paralyzed. She's given up internally, too. My brilliant, stubborn daughter just stopped fighting, and every day I see her slowly dying. A broken pain resonated in his voice. Michael immediately felt the torment of a father who had exhausted all avenues and come to his last desperate chance. You know what doctors can't do? Michael whispered. They don't raise the dead. They can't fix the mistakes that torment you every night. And they certainly don't promise miracles to broken fathers who think former surgeons will save what the best clinics in the world couldn't. But even as he said this, Michael was already stepping aside, letting Richard Wellington into his workshop. By noon, the park was almost empty, except for a couple of runners and an elderly man feeding ducks by the pond. Michael arrived first and chose a bench under a huge maple tree, whose leaves, detaching, rained down like golden coins with every gust of wind. All morning he had tried to work on the ordered rocking horse, but his hands trembled so much that he almost ruined the mane he had been carving for a whole week. Richard Wellington appeared shortly after, walking slowly, bent under an invisible weight. Now he wasn't in an expensive suit, but in jeans and a simple wool coat. The transformation was striking. Without the armor of wealth, Richard looked just like any other desperate father clinging to the last thread of hope. He sat next to Michael without an invitation, and his hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. "This is Sarah, 6 months ago," Richard said, showing Michael a photo of a beautiful girl with long blonde hair and intelligent green eyes, standing by a science fair exhibit. She had just won first place for her project on nerve regeneration and spinal cord injuries. Full scholarship to Harvard. She dreamed of studying medicine and changing the world. She always said that for every problem there's a solution, if you're smart enough to find it. His voice faltered as he flipped the picture. In the next photo, the same girl lay unconscious in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines. Her face was pale and still, as if she would never wake up. The accident happened on Route 9 during a thunderstorm. Some drunk driver ran a red light, and Sarah's car flipped 4 times before hitting an oak tree. She was in a coma for 3 weeks, and when she finally woke up, Richard trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The spinal cord injury was complete, at the level of the first lumbar vertebra, he continued in the clinical language he had learned over months of medical consultations. Complete paralysis below the waist, no sensation or voluntary movement, no hope of recovery. That's what all the neurologists said. But physical paralysis isn't the worst part. When Sarah walked into a room, she lit it up. She argued with teachers about philosophy, discussed politics at the dinner table, and now she doesn't talk to anyone. She doesn't eat unless I force her. She doesn't even look out the window. It's as if the accident broke not only her spine, but also her spirit. Michael examined the photos, seeing not only Sarah's face, but also the faces of dozens of patients he had treated over the years. Young people whose futures had been stolen by random violence, whose families hoped for a miracle he couldn't always give. "Why do you think I can help her if even the best neurologists at Harvard were powerless?" Michael asked, though something in Sarah's eyes reminded him of another girl who had once fought the impossible with unwavering determination. "Because you didn't just treat patients, you changed the whole approach to nervous system recovery," Richard replied, pulling out a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local Surgeon Develops Revolutionary Method for Spinal Cord Injuries," and the photo showed a much younger Michael receiving an award for innovative surgical techniques. The article came out 5 years ago. It mentions your experimental work on neural pathway regeneration, the theory that intensive fine motor training can help the brain create new connections around damaged spinal cord tissue. The medical community called you a visionary until you disappeared. Michael's throat tightened as he read his own words in the article. Promises of future treatments for spinal cord injuries now seemed like prophecies from an entirely different life. "That was before," Michael said, returning the clipping. "Before my wife Elena died on my operating table." before I realized that any dreams of the future are worthless if you can't save the person you love most. These hands that saved hundreds of lives failed me when it mattered most. I haven't picked up a scalpel since." His confession hung between them like a heavy bridge that neither man was ready to cross. Richard remained silent for a few minutes, digesting what he had heard. When he spoke again, his words were carefully chosen, soft but insistent. "Perhaps that's why you are the one who can help Sarah. Not because you're perfect, but because you know what it's like to lose everything and still find meaning to live on. Sarah is paralyzed not only in body, but in heart and soul. She needs someone who has fallen from the peak and managed to learn to get up again every morning." Against common sense, which urged him to flee, Michael nodded. "I'll meet with her," he finally said. "But please understand one thing. I cannot promise any medical miracles. Whatever I try for Sarah, it won't be about surgery or traditional medicine. All that is in the past." Relief was clearly reflected on Richard's face. His shoulders slumped, as if an unbearable weight had been lifted. "What will it be about then?" he asked. Michael looked at his hands. These tools, which had performed miracles and caused so much pain, were now calloused and stained from months of carpentry. "About what I myself am slowly learning, carving figure after figure," he said. "The art of healing without cutting, the ability to restore without destroying, to find beauty in what is broken." As they stood to leave, Michael suddenly realized he was returning to the world he had sworn to leave forever. The Wellingtons' mansion stood on 5 acres of manicured lawn in Millbrook's most prestigious neighborhood. The huge Tudor-style building was a monument to success and seemed as cold and impregnable as a mausoleum. Michael drove his battered pickup truck into the circular driveway, feeling like an outsider in a world of marble fountains and professionally designed gardens. Through the tall windows, he saw expensive paintings and furniture, but the house felt empty, as if no amount of money could fill the void left by grief. The door was opened by a middle-aged woman, a Latina named Rosa. Rosa, who introduced herself as the housekeeper, spoke with a soft but inwardly firm confidence of someone who had cared for this family during their hardest days. In her tired eyes, Michael saw the same hopelessness as in Richard's, the look of someone helplessly watching a family slowly crumble. "Senor Stone," Rosa said with a heavy accent, but in understandable English. "I'm glad you came. The señorita needs someone who understands what it means to lose everything." She led him through the corridors, where family photos from happier times hung on the walls. Richard and a beautiful blonde woman Michael assumed was Sarah's mother. Pictures from exotic vacations, birthdays with lavish cakes and genuine smiles. "Senora Wellington passed away when Sarah was 12, Rosa explained, noticing his gaze at the photos. "Cancer just like your wife." Senor Richard tried to be both father and mother at once. "But a father's love alone isn't enough to mend a broken heart." They stopped at the foot of a curving staircase, and Rosa looked upstairs with concern. "Sarah hasn't left her room in 3 weeks. Neither physical therapists, nor psychologists, nor even her school friends can get to her. She refuses to see anyone." Michael slowly ascended the stairs, each step feeling like a step into someone else's pain. The house was beautiful, but sterile. It lacked the comfort and warmth of a real home. On the second floor, Rosa pointed to a closed door at the end of the corridor. "She knows you're coming," Rosa whispered. "But she might not talk to you. Be patient, Senor Stone. She's not angry at everyone around her. She's angry at herself for surviving when perhaps she shouldn't have." Through the thin door, Michael heard faint classical music, something sad and beautiful, matching the mood of the entire house. When he knocked, the music ceased, but there was no answer. After a minute, he tried the doorknob. The door was unlocked. Sarah Wellington sat in an expensive wheelchair by the bedroom window, staring at the autumn landscape with the lifeless gaze of someone who had endured too much pain for her 16 years. She didn't turn when Michael entered, showed no hint of acknowledging his presence, but he noticed the tension in her shoulders, how her hands gripped the armrests of the wheelchair as if her life depended on it. The room was full of contrasts. Expensive furniture and electronics coexisted with medical equipment. Teenage band and movie posters adorned the walls. Nearby, get-well cards, clearly long unnoticed. On the nightstand, in a frame, was a photo of a young Sarah crossing a finish line, likely in a running competition. Her arms were raised in victory, her face beaming with joy. It was a painfully unsettling reminder of everything the accident had taken from her. "You can leave," Sarah said without turning. Her voice was flat and devoid of emotion. "I don't want to hear another apology or lecture about how important it is to be optimistic and that everything happens for a reason. My father has brought dozens of specialists, psychologists, and miracle workers here, but none of them will change the fact. I'll never walk again." Michael didn't move, didn't speak, just stood quietly in the doorway, studying this broken girl who so strongly resembled himself in the month after Elena's death. The same empty eyes, the same defensive anger, the same desperate attempt to push away anyone who might offer hope, only to take it away again. He saw the intelligence burning within her despair, a willful mind that was now entirely directed towards self-destruction. "You're right," Michael said calmly, stepping over the threshold and closing the door behind him. "I didn't come here to fix you or cure you, or to instill false hope that you'll walk again. And you're absolutely right. Not everything happens for a reason. Sometimes terrible things happen to good people just because, and there's no meaning in it except the meaning we give it later ourselves." Sarah's eyebrows lifted slightly. This was clearly not the answer she expected from another adult who came to save her. "Then why are you here?" she asked, and for the first time, the former harshness in her voice softened slightly. Michael looked around the room, noticing the medical equipment, unused art supplies gathering dust on a shelf, a guitar leaning against the wall with slack, forgotten strings. "Because, perhaps, we are both equally lost," he said. "And sometimes it's good to have someone with you when you're looking for the way back." For the first time since his arrival, Sarah's mask slipped slightly, and curiosity flickered beneath the layers of defense. "Back where?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Michael admitted, "but I'd like to find out." For the next hour, they talked in Sarah's room about everything except the accident and the paralysis. Michael told her about Emma, about the simple joy of watching an 8-year-old daughter discover the world. Sarah talked about the books she had read, complex novels on philosophy and human nature that not every adult could handle. Gradually, the wall she had built around herself began to crack, revealing the brilliant, passionate girl she had been before tragedy altered her fate. "I used to draw," she confessed, glancing at the art supplies on the shelf. "I loved how colors would intertwine to create something new. But now my hands tremble from the medication. And besides, what could I even do that would have meaning?" "What if I told you that I might know another way to work with your hands?" Michael cautiously offered. "One that doesn't require perfectly precise movements or perfect technique." Sarah turned to him, skeptical but interested. "For example?" Michael pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of one of his latest carvings, a small bird with feathers so intricately carved that it seemed to move even in stillness. "Wood carving," he explained. "The main thing in this craft is patience and feeling. The wood itself seems to tell you what it wants to become. You just have to learn to listen." Sarah studied the photo for a long time, and Michael saw her analytical mind at work, considering possibilities she had never imagined before. "Why do you want to teach me?" she asked. "Because," Michael put away his phone, "I think we both need to remember what it's like to create something truly beautiful again." As Michael was about to leave, Sarah called out to him from her wheelchair, "If I agree to learn, I have conditions. You won't treat me like I'm broken, you won't give inspiring speeches, and if I ask you to leave, you'll leave." Michael considered her terms, recognizing the same unyielding independence as before. "Agreed," he said. "When do we start?" The next morning, Michael arrived at the Wellingtons' house with a worn leather tool bag and a piece of basswood. Rosa led him upstairs to Sarah's room, where she was waiting for him with a mixture of anticipation and skepticism on her face. "Plans have changed," Michael announced. "We won't be working here. Put on your jacket, we're going outside." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "I don't go outside anymore," she said quickly, and the old defensive walls began to rise again. Too many variables, too many people watching. Michael put down his tool bag and sat opposite her. "Sarah, I can teach you carving here, in a sterile room among machines, or I can teach you where the craft was born, under the open sky, in the scent of autumn, and to the sounds of real life around us." Long minutes of internal struggle. And finally, Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, but if this suddenly turns into an inspirational moment, I'm coming right back inside." The garden behind the Wellington house was a true work of landscape art. Stone paths wound between carefully selected flower beds. Old trees provided shade and privacy. Michael chose a spot by a small pond, where a wooden bench stood under a mighty oak, its branches forming a golden and crimson canopy of leaves above it, dappling the morning light with dancing patterns. He positioned Sarah's wheelchair next to the bench so that her hands would be at a comfortable working height. "The first lesson," he said, taking out a piece of basswood, "is the ability to listen. Every tree has a story: where it grew, what winds it endured, how it lived, and how it died. Before making the first cut, you need to understand the material." He placed the wood in Sarah's hands, helping her feel the grain with her fingers. "Feel that? That's how the fibers run in long, straight lines. That's the wood's natural structure. Don't fight it, work with it, and the wood will reward you." Sarah's fingers glided carefully over the wood, and from her face, it was clear how her analytical mind was noting all the details that others would miss. "It's much warmer than I thought," she finally remarked, and some tension left her shoulders. "And it has its own light scent, as if it's alive." Michael nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Wood never truly dies. It merely changes. Every time you cut, you're also participating in a transformation, helping the wood become something entirely different." He took out a small carving knife with a comfortable wooden handle, smoothed by years of use. "This was my grandfather's knife," he said. "He taught me. A tool is just an extension of your hand, your thought, your respect for the material. The magic isn't in the knife, but in your connection with what you're creating." For the first hour, Michael didn't let Sarah make a single cut. She simply learned to hold the knife in different ways, familiarizing herself with how the position of her palm changed her control over the tool. When Sarah finally dared to make her first cut, the knife slipped slightly and she cut more than she intended. She quietly cursed under her breath, her face flushed with irritation. "I told you my hands tremble," she mumbled, already about to put the knife down. "This was a stupid idea." Michael gently stopped her. "Look at what you just did." He pointed to the uneven chip in the wood. "Do you see how it changes the character of the whole piece? What if it's not a mistake, but the beginning of something unusual?" Sarah carefully examined the uneven mark. Her artistic eye began to see not mistakes, but possibilities. "I could incorporate this into the design," she said slowly. "Make it part of the plan instead of trying to hide it." Michael smiled. "Now you're thinking like a true carver. Some of the most beautiful things I've ever seen were born precisely in those moments when you had to work with unexpected difficulties." As the morning progressed, Sarah began to relax and fall into the rhythm of the craft. Her movements became more confident with each small success. Over the following weeks, Michael and Sarah developed their own simple routine. Every weekday morning, promptly at 9 o'clock, he would arrive with his tool bag and the workpiece chosen for the day. Sarah's skills grew rapidly. Her innate artistic sensibility and perseverance allowed her to create increasingly complex and expressive works. First, she carved a small bird, then a flower, then a miniature tree with textured bark and delicate leaves. Each new project pushed the boundaries of her abilities, and Michael watched with bated breath as, along with her craftsmanship, Sarah's self-confidence returned. Even more importantly, he began to notice changes unrelated to wood carving. Sarah started reading again, began video calling her friends from school, and even showed interest in continuing her studies in the future. The girl who hadn't spoken to anyone for months seemed to be coming back to life. But it was in the third week of their lessons that Sarah first noticed something unusual in Michael's teaching. They were working on a particularly intricate sculpture when Sarah's knife slipped, nearly cutting her finger. Michael's reaction was instantaneous and very telling. He grabbed her hand, carefully examined the cut, coldly and precisely checked her pulse and pupil reaction, and asked many detailed questions about possible numbness or tingling. All of this was the behavior of someone with serious medical training, not an ordinary craftsman. "You just acted like a doctor," Sarah said, staring intently at his face. "Actually, you act like a doctor in a lot of ways. How you monitor my hands, how you ask questions about rehabilitation, even how you adjust my wheelchair for proper posture." Michael felt a chill run through him. He realized his mask was starting to slip. "I said I used to study medicine," Michael said carefully. But Sarah's mind was already connecting what he had hoped to keep separate. "Studying medicine and being a doctor are not the same thing at all," she retorted. "You have a surgeon's hands, confident, precise, unwavering, even when you're teaching me wood carving." She put down the knife and confidently rolled closer. Her green eyes sparkled with interest. "And my father is acting strangely too, as if he's hiding something. What kind of doctor were you?" she asked directly. "And why are you pretending to be someone else?" Michael felt the walls of his new life crumble. He realized that Sarah's perceptiveness was a far more serious threat to his secret than he had thought. The truth would soon come out, and then everything between them would change. Michael looked at the half-finished carved horse in his hands. Its wooden eyes seemed to reproach him for all the lies he had lived for the past months. "I was a neurosurgeon," he finally confessed. "I specialized in spinal and brain injuries, developed experimental methods for restoring neural connections, and published articles that caused a stir in the medical community." Sarah's face changed expression one after another. Surprise, hurt, understanding, and then a cold anger that made her seem older than her 16 years. "So, all of this, the carving, the friendship, you were just studying me like a laboratory mouse." Her voice became dangerously quiet. "Were you going to write scientific articles about art therapy for paralyzed teenagers? Is that what all this was for?" Michael saw walls rising around her again, now even taller and stronger than before. He understood. He risked losing not only her trust, but the very ability to help her heal. "No," Michael said firmly. "My work with wood is real, Sarah. The fact that I care about you is true. I'm not studying you, and I won't publish anything about our sessions." He put down his tools, turned to face her, knowing that only complete honesty could save their relationship. "I stopped practicing medicine 3 years ago when my wife died, right on the table where I was operating on her myself. I couldn't save the person I loved most, and after that, I lost faith that I could help anyone at all. I came to Millbrook to hide, to live quietly, and to forget my old life." Sarah listened with the same focused seriousness she displayed in carving, scrutinizing his every word for sincerity. "Your father found me because he heard rumors about my scientific work. He was desperate, and desperate people do everything to find even a hint of hope. But I didn't agree to help you because of your diagnosis," Michael continued. "I came because I saw in your eyes what I saw in my own mirror every morning." "What was that, maybe?" Sarah asked, though from her voice it was clear she guessed. "The look of someone who once believed they could change the world, and then lost that faith because the world changed them," Michael replied. "I saw potential in you, unrelated to whether you'd ever walk, but entirely dependent on whether you'd find reasons to continue creating, developing, becoming yourself." Sarah was silent for a long time, studying the wooden horse as if it could provide answers to questions she didn't yet know. If you're really a neurosurgeon, why didn't you ever try to examine me, or give a medical opinion or prognosis advice? She finally asked. Because I'm not your doctor, Michael replied. I'm your friend, and friends see possibilities, not disabilities. For the first time since Sarah learned the truth, her gaze softened slightly. So, carving isn't medical therapy disguised as art? She asked again. Just carving. Michael nodded. Just carving, which is very good for the soul. Their conversation was interrupted by an unfamiliar voice drifting through the garden. The voice was authoritative, professional, with the distinct manner of someone accustomed to unquestioning obedience. Doctor. Stone! The call rang out. I'm Dr. James Morrison from Johns Hopkins University. I need to speak with you about your research. Michael felt as if he had been filled with ice water. Morrison was one of the most respected neurologists in the country, and most importantly, he could reveal everything Michael had been running from for so long. Stay here, Michael told Sarah, but she was already turning her wheelchair towards the house. No, she retorted. If it concerns you and medicine, it concerns me too. As he made his way to the house, Michael saw out of the corner of his eye a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive coat, passionately arguing with Richard Wellington on the porch. He knew his entire new, carefully constructed life was about to collapse. Dr. Morrison was even more imposing than Michael remembered. Authoritative, brilliant, and absolutely confident in his own righteousness. As Michael and Sarah approached, Morrison turned to them, glancing at the wheelchair, the carving tools, the obvious closeness between teacher and student. Michael, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. For a man who is supposedly hiding from a nervous breakdown in seclusion, you look surprisingly well. Richard Wellington stood next to Morrison, looking very uncomfortable, clearly not knowing how much to reveal about his arrangements. Dr. Morrison contacted me through mutual acquaintances in medical circles, Richard explained. He represents a consortium of hospitals and research institutions that are very interested in your former work. Morrison stepped forward, his gaze assessing, moving from Michael to Sarah. We are interested not only in your former work, but also in what you are doing now. Information spreads quickly in our circle. Michael, a paralyzed patient who has made significant progress under the guidance of a disgraced neurosurgeon. These are the kinds of stories that attract attention. Morrison took out a tablet and showed them brain scans, making Sarah gasp. These are scans of your brain activity, Ms. Wellington, taken during your last MRI. Note the increased activity in the motor cortex areas responsible for hand and finger movement. This is not a coincidence. This is systemic neural reconstruction happening in real time. Sarah peered at the colorful brain images, understanding that changes were indeed happening inside her skull. Carving wasn't just therapy. It was a medical intervention to which she had not consented. You used me? She whispered to Michael so softly that her voice was barely audible. All this time you've been experimenting on me, without telling me anything. Michael reached for her, but she sharply rolled her wheelchair back, avoiding any touch. Sarah, no! He began, but she cut him off with a look of pure betrayal. Don't you dare lie to me again. You're a neurosurgeon, a spinal cord injury specialist, and suddenly you just happened to decide to teach wood carving to a paralyzed teenage girl? Morrison stood between them, clearly enjoying the unfolding drama. The probability of coincidence is 0, Ms. Wellington. Your father specifically sought out Dr. Stone because of his research, and Dr. Stone agreed to help because he saw an opportunity to test his theories away from the complexities of hospital oversight and ethics committees. Richard Wellington turned pale, realizing how his desperate attempt to help his daughter had turned into something ugly and manipulative. I didn't seek him out for this, Richard protested, but Morrison was relentless. The method was ingenious in its own way. Using art therapy as a cover for intensive neurotraining, bypassing all the legal issues of experimental surgery, and, if successful, obtaining proof of concept that could revolutionize approaches to spinal cord injury treatment. Sarah's clenched fists and the extinguished light in her eyes clearly indicated that the deception had shocked her. Michael, who had tried so hard to bring back that light, was now powerless. When Morrison left, Michael felt the weight of inevitability on his shoulders. Richard Wellington placed a hand on his shoulder, and together they watched the disappearing sedan. "I'm sorry," Richard said quietly. "I didn't want it to turn out this way. Sarah really got stronger. She gained more confidence, became herself again," he continued. "But now she feels betrayed by those she trusted most." Michael nodded grimly, clearly understanding that breaking Sarah's faith in people was far worse than any physical injury. "And she has every right to feel betrayed," he said. "I should have told her the truth from the beginning. I should have explained what I expected from working with the wood." From deep within the house came Emma's voice, trying to comfort Sarah. The childish spontaneity of an 8-year-old girl was shattered by the complexities of the adult world. 3 days passed before Sarah agreed to meet Michael again. When she finally agreed to talk, it was only on her terms. In the hospital conference room with Dr. Martinez, her neurologist, as a witness, Sarah sat in her wheelchair at the head of the polished table, looking older than her 16 years, and Michael took the seat opposite her. "I want to know exactly what was happening to me," she said firmly, despite the storm of emotions raging within her during those days. "I want to know about your research, about what you expected from the carving sessions, and I want to understand what these head scans mean. But most importantly, I need to know what part of our friendship was real, and what was just part of another experiment." Dr. Martinez shifted his gaze between them, awkwardly sensing the tension in the room, but understanding how necessary this conversation was. Michael took a deep breath and began to explain everything in detail: the theory of neural pathway reconstruction, the experimental surgeries, the encouraging early results, up until the moment Elena's death ended his career. "The basic principle is this: the brain's potential is far greater than we previously thought," he said with extreme precision and clarity. "If spinal cord tissue is damaged, the neural pathways responsible for movement and sensation are severed. My research showed that intensive fine motor exercises can help the brain create new bypass connections." Sarah listened very attentively. Her analytical mind eagerly absorbed the scientific details, even as her emotions were just beginning to grasp the implications. "So, this wood carving specifically stimulated certain areas of the brain," she clarified. "Fine motor skills, visuospatial perception, hand-eye coordination. All of this is specifically aimed at neuron growth." Michael reluctantly nodded. "In part. That was the theory. But Sarah, even if carving helped your brain create new connections, that doesn't diminish what you achieved." "But how do I know what's real?" Sarah asked, pain in her voice. "How do I know what of my feelings and achievements is real, and what's just the result of someone's medical manipulation?" Michael paused for a moment, pondering the depth Sarah had put into the question. "Look at what you created," he finally answered, pointing to the small carved bird Sarah had brought to the meeting. It was one of her latest works, striking in its skill and artistic vision. "Medical intervention might have given your hands more stability or improved your concentration, but it didn't decide what to carve, which line would be superfluous, how to breathe meaning and life into the wood. That was all within you, in the part that was with you before the accident, and will remain with you even if you can never walk again." Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly after Michael's words, clearly impressed by both the scientific depth and the ethical tact. 2 weeks later, an unexpected event changed everything again. Sarah was working in the garden on a warm spring morning, carving a complex sculpture from different types of wood, when she suddenly felt a strange tingling in her left leg. At first, she thought it was phantom pain, a common phenomenon with spinal cord injuries, but the sensation didn't disappear and gradually only intensified. Sarah called Rosa, trying to speak calmly as she described what she felt. "It's probably nothing special," she said, though her heart pounded with a mixture of hope and fear. "But could you please ask my dad to call Dr. Martinez? I think I need to be examined." Less than an hour later, Sarah was at Hartford Hospital, undergoing a series of tests to determine if the impossible was actually happening. The results were unprecedented in Sarah's medical history. MRI scans showed significant changes in the areas around the damaged spinal cord. The injury remained severe as before, but there was evidence of new neural pathways emerging that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Dr. Martinez called colleagues from across the region to review the scans and confirm what seemed like a medical miracle. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Martinez told Sarah and Richard as they looked at the brain images together. "There are clear signs of neural regeneration and pathway restoration on such a scale and at such a speed that it calls into question everything we knew about recovery after spinal cord injury." The tingling sensation in Sarah's leg was not phantom pain. It was her nervous system's first cautious attempt to restore the signal channels severed in the accident. Michael received a call from Richard during a carpentry lesson at the local cultural center. Volunteer work he was doing, while various checks related to his unlicensed activities were ongoing. Michael's hands trembled as he listened to the description of the test results, and he had to sit down to digest what he heard. "She's not walking yet," Richard said carefully. "But there's undeniable evidence of neural regeneration. Doctors believe it might be related to the intensive fine motor exercises she performed during her woodcarving sessions, but they want to observe her development for a while longer before drawing conclusions." Michael was overwhelmed by a sense of vindication and fear simultaneously. Vindication that his theory of neural reconstruction might be effective, and fear of how this would impact Sarah's right to privacy and independence. The medical community will descend on her like vultures. Everyone will want to claim credit for her miraculous recovery. The reaction to Sarah's unexpected improvement was swift and grand. Scientists from leading universities and medical centers contacted the family, asking for permission to study her case, offering experiments and research partnerships that could advance the understanding of spinal cord injury recovery. But Sarah, already schooled by the bitter experience of medical exploitation, now approached these opportunities with firm wisdom, having learned to protect her interests. "I am willing to participate in serious research that can help other patients," she told the assembled doctors during a family meeting at Hartford Hospital. "But any research involving me will take place under the control of patient advocates, with full transparency of goals and methods, and with my unconditional right to withdraw from the project at any time without consequences. I will no longer be anyone's guinea pig, no matter how promising the research may seem." Her conditions were met with respect and surprise. Many of the doctors had never before encountered a teenager who spoke so confidently about medical ethics. Morrison tried to interject, arguing that his previous observation of Sarah's case gave him priority in studying her recovery. But he was quickly removed by hospital staff who were informed of the ethical violations in his approach. But most importantly, Sarah's story served as a catalyst for changes in how medical institutions approached experimental methods and patient data sharing. Hartford Hospital introduced new rules requiring explicit patient consent for any use of medical data in research, and other institutions adopted similar measures amidst the widespread publicity surrounding Sarah's story. The girl who had been a victim of unauthorized medical oversight became the reason for systemic changes that would protect future patients from similar abuses. Her own experience transformed her from a victim into an advocate, and she embraced this new role with the same passionate strength of mind she had displayed in her studies. Michael found himself in a unique position. On one hand, his ideas received recognition, and on the other, he was cautioned. Ethics committees noted that his method could indeed be useful, but emphasized that his unwillingness to ensure full informed patient consent was a serious breach of professional standards. The solution was found in a carefully crafted agreement. He was allowed to continue his work on neural reconstruction only in academic institutions under strict control and with absolute transparency for patients. "You have discovered something potentially revolutionary," the head of the Medical Ethics Board told him at the final hearing. "But any revolution in medicine must be balanced with respect for those we aim to help. Your method is promising, but the approach drastically needs to change before it becomes ethically acceptable." Michael gratefully accepted these terms, understanding that he had been given a second chance to contribute to medicine without repeating the mistakes that had cost him Sarah's trust. Sarah's physical recovery progressed slowly but steadily over the next few months. The tingling in her legs gradually gave way to noticeable changes. Muscle tone improved, new reactions to stimulation appeared, and then the first voluntary movements in her left foot. She worked with physical therapists who were amazed by the unique pattern of her recovery. Her progress followed the very neural pathways Michael had discussed in his research, rather than classical rehabilitation schemes. But Sarah approached all improvements with the same balanced realism she applied to all aspects of her condition. "I am grateful for every step forward," she told reporters interested in her recovery, "but I have learned not to link my worth and future solely to physical abilities. Will I ever walk again? It doesn't matter. I am still the same person who can create beautiful things and contribute to the world." This perspective on disability and recovery became a message that resonated beyond the medical community. The relationship between Sarah and Michael became much deeper and more complex than simply teacher-student or doctor-patient. They continued their collaborative wood-carving projects, but now their cooperation included maintaining scientific documentation and regular consultations with medical professionals monitoring Sarah's progress. Michael learned to balance his desire to help with respect for Sarah's autonomy. He always explained his observations and theories, emphasizing that all decisions remained entirely hers. "Now I think of Michael as a partner in my recovery, not as someone who is treating me," Sarah explained during a television interview that aired exactly 6 months after her story became public. "He shares knowledge and advice, but he never decides for me what I need or what I want. That's the difference between healing and manipulation. One approach empowers the patient, the other uses them for its own purposes." Their relationship became an example of ethical collaboration between doctors and patients. Emma continued to visit Sarah regularly, now bringing school friends who were interested in wood carving and inspired by Sarah's recovery story. The Wellington family home gradually filled with children's voices and creative energy. Sarah began holding informal carving classes for neighborhood children, sharing not only techniques, but also lessons in perseverance, creativity, and the ability to find beauty in the most unexpected places. Rosa watched these gatherings with maternal pride, observing Sarah transform from an isolated, angry teenager into a young woman who used her experience to support others. "Senorita Sarah learned the most important lesson," Rosa told Michael during one of his visits. "She understood that healing is something done collaboratively with other people, not something that just happens to you." The house, which had once seemed like a dreary mausoleum, was filled with laughter and the voices of young people making plans for future creative endeavors. 1 year after their story became public, Sarah received an invitation that surprised everyone. Harvard Medical School asked her to deliver the keynote address at their annual symposium on medical ethics. Standing before a hall full of medical professionals, she spoke with remarkable composure about the patient's perspective on experimental treatments, the importance of informed consent, and honesty in the doctor-patient relationship. At its best, medicine is a collaboration between doctor and patient, she stated, her voice resonating confidently to the very last row of the auditorium. It requires trust, openness, and mutual respect. If even one of these elements disappears, even the most benevolent treatment becomes a form of violence. Her speech was met with a standing ovation, but most importantly, it sparked new conversations about medical education reform, the need to pay more attention to patient communication, and the ethical aspects of medical practice. Sarah found her voice as an advocate, and the medical community heard her. Michael attended Sarah's speech at Harvard, sitting at the back of the hall and proudly watching his former student address the country's top specialists. Later, as they walked together through the Harvard yard, Sarah leaned on crutches and could walk short distances independently. They recalled the entire journey that had brought them to this moment. "Did you ever regret what happened?" Michael asked. "The deception, the publicity, this whole tangled story?" Sarah pondered, as always approaching difficult questions thoughtfully. "I regret the lies," she finally said, "but I don't regret the outcome. Everything that happened, the carving, the recovery, even Morrison's use of me, all of it became the reason for changes that will help others not go through what we did. Sometimes good changes emerge from bad beginnings if people are willing to learn from mistakes." As they stood together in the university courtyard, where future doctors would learn and grow, both Sarah and Michael understood. Their story had become much bigger than they had planned. It was no longer just about a girl who learned to carve wood or a doctor who found redemption in teaching. Their experience became a case study in medical ethics, a catalyst for policy changes, and a reminder: true healing requires not only scientific knowledge, but also heartfelt compassion. Emma, now 9 years old and still visiting Sarah, understood the essence of what was happening better than anyone from the very beginning. Sometimes broken things can be made more beautiful than they were before, but only if people honestly admit they are broken and work together to fix them. The wooden bird Sarah carved in her first week of lessons still stood on a shelf in Michael's workshop. Its wings were spread in eternal flight, a reminder that even the most complicated stories can end in a way that is honest and worthy for everyone involved.